To hear us talk to you this morning. We're really excited to be here. My name is Jenny Lanier. This is Janelle Arita and Steven Raden, and we work with IBM Design. And today we're going to talk to you about a project that we've been working on for pretty much this whole year, and we're really excited about it. So this is us, not the TV show, just a picture of us. We work on enterprise software design, and that's a pretty complicated space. So designing can be a little challenging sometimes. Now, this is a basic table of one of the products that we designed for. Seems pretty simple, right? A table, you've got columns, you've got rows, but an added layer of complexity with this is that each one of these cells is determined by multiple inputs. So that can get pretty hairy really fast. Now, when you're editing a table that has multiple dependencies in each of your rows or cells, you can get something that looks like this. This was the pattern at the time we designed this table for inline editing in tables. So as you can see, it gets pretty complicated pretty fast. So imagine what it's like when the only way you can navigate something like this is through auditory cues. And that's just what happens when people have vision impairments. They have to use things like JAWS, which is a screen reader application program that helps people with vision impairments navigate and engage with software and products and web applications. Now, we work with somebody who has a vision impairment, and he uses JAWS to do just that. So let's take a minute to see what it's like to use JAWS in real life in a basic exchange using Slack.
This is a standard Windows laptop. To my right is a Braille display here. And I'm going to first run JAWS at the speed I listen to it, which you won't be able to understand, but it's just a demonstration. So JAWS, options, voices, voice adjustments,
41, 32%, 23%, 14%, 15%. New notification from Slack. Steven Raden. Hey Randy, how's it going? Slack-cloud lab. Links list send. Steven Raden left parent direct message active 200 highlights. Message it. Search edit news virtual server edit left blank message list main region blank edit level 1 message input clickable. Blank message list end. Hey Randy, how's it going? Link 1038 search edit. Going well, except that Slack was labeled a message box. Quote search quote. Do we have new designs to review? Virtual PC. Link Steven Raden. Link to well, it's good to see some of those issues over the accessibility talk that they left parent edited right parent. Message. Search at virtual PC. Edit blank message list edit. Slightly smiling face emoji graphic bar. One thing with Slack is that it does not read your new messages that they arrive. Search virtual edit blank message list. Okay, thanks for getting in touch. Talk soon.
So that entire exchange was just this. Just these few messages back and forth. Now, we don't have to do a raise of hands, because I already think I know the answer to this, but was it really hard to follow along with the robot voice? Because we were in the room when that happened, and we didn't understand what was going on. Now, furthermore, as you could tell in the first part of the video, Randy slowed that down to about 30% of the speed where he normally listens to that. So just let that sink in for a minute. That is tough. That's tough when you're just using Slack. Now, let's go back and think about what is that like when you're trying to edit or read or interact with a table that can be this complicated? It's not fun probably, right? So we didn't really realize a lot of issues with this table until we worked with our coworker, Randy, and he used JAWS to engage with our product and give us feedback about what it was like to edit, to read, to input values, all sorts of basic common behaviors that you would do with a table. And we discovered there were a lot of accessibility issues. He wasn't able to easily tab through fields. He wasn't able to understand exactly where he was in the page. There were a lot of issues that, unfortunately, we discovered really late in the process. Reading, if something as simple as just reading very high-level information in this table required a lot of steps. So let's take a step back. We've been talking a little bit about accessibility and why our table wasn't really accessible. But it's a pretty simple definition. It applies to everything from having wheelchair ramps to get into buildings if you have a physical disability, to having the right color contrast on your site for people who have color blindness or any sort of impairment like that. So accessibility, simply put, is the ability of everyone, regardless of disability or impairment, to have access to something. And access doesn't just mean it technically is possible. It means it's as simple as it is for people who might not live with a similar impairment or disability. Accessibility is really important to IBM, and there are several reasons for that. A couple are basic business sense reasons. Making sure that we comply with accessibility guidelines saves us time and money in our design and development process, because we're not having to go back and redo things in order to meet those needs. We also want to make sure we are designing a useful and effective and delightful product for every single one of our customers and users. And following and meeting accessibility compliance also opens us up to being able to secure really big contracts from businesses that require those regulations, such as government contracts. Now, we didn't know a lot of those things until we started working with our friend Randy. So this is our friend from earlier on in the video. He is a development manager for the Cloud Innovation Lab at IBM. And his primary job is managing developers and giving feedback to developers. It's not accessibility, it's just something that he's passionate about because he's completely blind. He uses screen readers. He has a guide dog who is very, very beautiful and amazing, and I love him. He has a walking stick. He navigates the world in a completely different way than we really realized until we were able to get to know him a lot more. So by the time Randy is able to engage with our products, they're already in code, because that's the way screen readers work. Screen readers have to use things that are already live and in code to go through and read the content to people who are using those programs. But the problem with that is, by the time all of the effort has been made to put things in code, there's a lot of friction to making changes, because everybody's worked really hard on something and it's halfway out the door and nobody wants to make those big changes. So unfortunately, a lot of feedback goes partially addressed or not really addressed if it's not a full stop ship moment. Now, by the time Randy used JAWS to engage with this table, it was kind of halfway out the door. You can see how complex it was. It took a lot of time and it took a lot of effort to get it in code in the first place. So in order to address those accessibility issues, we ended up using ARIA tags and sort of makeshift solutions in order to address those problems, when ideally we would have addressed those from the first stages of our design process. So we recognized this problem. We recognized a problem that his feedback his very valuable feedback was not being fully embraced and addressed in our design process. So, being from IBM Design, we decided to lean on a really powerful practice of design thinking to address and resolve this issue. So, for anyone who's not familiar with design thinking, there are pretty universal truths of what that means. One, users, users, users. We want to focus on users and their immediate essential needs. We want to treat everything as a prototype. Nothing is done ever. We're always looking to make sure that we can improve upon products and experiences for our users because their needs are so important to us. And also we want to co-create with diverse teams. With diversity comes an incredible resource of experiences and knowledge and viewpoints, and that's truly so valuable for our design process. And all of that, we kind of link around this, we anchor around this device in IBM we call the loop. The loop is made of observing problems, observing situations, reflecting and synthesizing your observations with your team, and then making design decisions out of these abstract kind of ideas. So through this process, we observed, we realized this was an issue that we weren't being able to incorporate this really valuable accessibility feedback in our product at a time when we could really use it. So observing that, we came together and made a problem statement to anchor this process and help guide our efforts to solve the problem. And that problem statement is this: how can we better incorporate accessibility into the design process so we can enable teammates with visual impairments to provide actionable feedback early as possible? We started out by just understanding and aligning on who we're designing for, who are the personas, the people who are affected and will be using this solution. Now, at first you might think, well, Randy is probably the main one, right? Well, yeah, he definitely is, but there are a couple other players in this process that need to be able to use this solution in order to make it sustainable and scalable. So Martin is our first persona, and he's based off of Randy, shocker. He has a background in computer science and engineering. He is a manager of developers, and he works closely with developers and designers to both understand designs and give feedback on that code and on those processes. Martin has a visual impairment and uses a lot of tools to help him navigate the world the way we do. Desi is a designer. Desi is based off of the experiences of Janelle, Steven, and myself. Because if this solution is only useful for Randy and isn't useful for us, then no one's going to be using it. So we wanted to make sure it was something that was easy for us to use as well. So Desi is a UX designer, and she creates wireframes, and she creates static or point-and-click prototypes in Sketch and InVision. Our other persona is Tanya, and she's a developer. So Tanya's important because Tanya works with Desi to code prototypes, and they work really closely together in the as-is before sharing things with Martin, the development manager. So now that I've introduced you to who all are the players in this process, I'm going to hand it over to Steven, and he's going to take you through an as-is scenario for this problem.
So, yes, we're going to, well, hopefully that's not too loud. Going to go through an as-is scenario that is essentially a replication of what we experienced when we were solving this problem. Many of you might know this or have experienced this yourself in that a designer such as Desi will get a new project. They will do their background research, talk with teams, do all that, come up with some wireframes, some prototypes, and communicate those designs to the team. The team gives their very nice, very welcome feedback, and there are some iterations done. And this might go on a couple rounds over a course of 3, 4, 5 months, depending on the scale of the project. And yes, go through it again. and again. At this point, in this particular project, the designs were strong enough, there was feedback that was good enough, that we moved on to the development process, and maybe some of that was happening along the way as well. But this is where we run into the issue that we've been discussing so far. The development team has now built this, and this is the first time that we've been able to get feedback from our development manager. And his feedback, his experience is extremely valuable, and his insight and perspective from a non-sighted user is even more invaluable. And in this case, we noted, as Jenny addressed, that there were a number of points of feedback that he had that were big issues, big red flags for us, at least as designers wanting to deliver a good experience. The problem here is that, like I said, it's been months, it's near the delivery date, things are going out the door. The notes that he was able to provide at best went on a backlog, hopefully to be seen, possibly never to be seen again. And there's some obvious pain points in there. First off, Martin, as a development manager who is not sighted, he's not able to give that feedback until those later stages of development. And like I mentioned, that means that a lot of the time that work or that feedback goes unaddressed. For Desi, a big problem is, as designers, we're trying to create a solution that is reachable and the best solution we can for the widest range of users possible. And we're not able to get the feedback that we need until those screens that we make are developed. And that is, again, way too late in the process. And then there's the issue for our developers, that they are people who we've experienced love to solve problems if they know what those problems are. And we are not able to address all the problems that Martin was able to address or identify until they had already built it. And at that point, all the work and effort that they have pretty much has to go through a long refactoring process. You know, hopefully it's an easy fix, but a lot of the time it's custom components, things like that, that take rethinking from the ground up potentially. Or it's going to be a really not great solution and a patchwork. So overall, what we went forward after that was we went and talked to Randy, our Martin, and went to him and really asked, you know, what is it that you need out of this? What is it that we can do so that you are better able to give that feedback earlier on? And he pretty much, simple statement, he just wanted to engage with the wireframes that we made before they ever became code. Early on in that process, the best we could do for him was have him in a room with us and try and describe about how far down the page or the table is. And when that table is clicked on, that it gets highlighted. And when that's highlighted, like X, Y, and Z thing happens. And that's not great for him. And so he just wanted to be able to interact with it and look at it before it ever became that live code. So any good design thinking process does start with research. We hoped that the market had something that already solved all of our problems and we could sign up on a website and get it done and solved for us. Did not find that as much. We ended up looking at a couple solutions here that already existed in a digital medium on the market. First was, hey, could we just build smaller prototypes faster? It's a way, but it's putting us as designers into roles that we may not necessarily do, may not have the time to do. Developers are already working on other solutions. It didn't seem like it would fit in with our day-to-day workflow very well, and it would be a large effort to onboard anyone else onto that we work with. Additionally, there are great solutions out there for visual-related things, such as Stark for Sketch, but unfortunately that is a contrast checker, and generally for colorblind issues. And so we also did some research and reading up on just general accessibility on the web to see if that could help us and understand us, and if we could explain concepts and identify issues ourselves earlier on. Good, informative, but not where we want to be, and doesn't really solve that issue of engaging with the wireframes earlier on. And then this is kind of a generic screen, but we actually found out after the fact that there's a team in IBM that was working on a solution that they're hoping will help, and that we are really excited to collaborate with, and we're excited to see where they go with it. And that's a Sketch plugin that might be able to kind of do some digital conversion, but it's not out yet. It wasn't helping us at the time, and we're trying to really get engagement from Randy and others like him. So we looked also into physical space. Being designers, and I'm sure many of you have done this as well, we have worked with physical material to produce digital things all the time, whether that's paper prototypes or models or whatever. And so we were comfortable in this space, and we liked the idea of it. And so we looked at things like embossers and 3D printers, see if we could physically print out a screen that he could interact with. But all of those are generally pretty expensive as well as slow. And they do take some specialized skill as well of rebuilding all the screens that you built somewhere else in another medium. So it wasn't exactly what we were looking for. And we did find other things in the market, such as Ray's line drawing kit, which we did find a use for down the line. And that is actually a kit that you draw a inkless pen on a plastic sheet of paper, and it creates raised ridges in that material that someone who is non-sighted can actually interact with or experience and feel. So from all of that, we realized, along with our goal that Randy gave us in our problem statement, that we really had the need for users, and in this case the users are designers, to be able to iterate with whatever our solution was quickly and in a physical tactile medium that would be easily accessible and usable by the person we wanted feedback from. And so we went to a phase kind of one, that is material exploration. And any good material comes from high quality shops. Oh, skipped a slide. First, we identified that we did need a few additional things that were kind of related to the problem statement that we had before, which was, again, we needed it to be easy to work with. Our user, Randy, could easily identify. The materials need to be reusable and durable, so we didn't have to keep remaking things all the time. And then, ideally, overall, inexpensive, who's not always trying to cut costs. So, here's where I meant to be. Any good material shop, such as Michael's. And we probably went in there looking a bit odd in that we weren't looking at colors and things like that, or how high quality of material it was or anything. We went in there and felt things. Put our hands on whatever we could and tried to identify what it was easy to tell, hold things together, and what was easy to tell one from another. And that's because it needed to be really easy when we used in this final medium to be able to run your fingers across it and know exactly when it switched. And so we gathered a bunch of those things: pipe cleaners, felt pads, sticky, little plush things, some rubber like glue pads, and hot glue guns and tape. And we used all those, and we started putting them together on screens. This is where we diverged a little bit, so you'll see a variety of different styles there. And we're trying to balance that speed and ease of use. So we did some things that were more abstract, that didn't represent it, and we did some things that were more exactly replicas of what's on the screen. And then we also identified using that Ray's line drawing kit that I showed earlier. And we found a use for it that I'll discuss in a second, but it was a kit that we could draw over our current wireframes. And here's Randy interacting with that, and he was frankly way more adept at being able to sense where the lines were and weren't than we were. We were blind when we were trying to do it, and he was able to see perfectly there. So overall, our takeaways from that was actually that the foam shaped hot glue felt, all of that material, super good for giving a high-level view of the page. We could put that down, he could interact with it easily, and then understand what the page was and remember where pieces of the page were and weren't. And we could, then address, okay, the table that's the second table on the page, and he could go there and know what's kind of there. And then additionally, that Ray's line drawing kit we identified as a way to get more precise, kind of blown up images if we have really detailed interactions. So I'm going to pass this over to Janelle to discuss how we kind of converged all of this work that we did and exploration that we did and create a more usable and shareable pattern.
So I'll talk about phase 2, creating a pattern library. And as Steven mentioned, we had variations of design iterations. And at this step, we wanted to converge our ideas to have a shared common language. So we looked to Carbon Design System. It is our design system at IBM. It consists of components, guidelines, how to use it, the various dates, and it's used for designers and developers to have a shared common language, to be able to have a universal common pattern, set of patterns, practices for all of our various products. So we wanted to build on that, something that we've been using within our teams. It's been successful. And if you think of Carbon as the digital design system, we wanted to make a tactile design system. So that led to putting together all of our previous iterations, what was successful, and creating a new design system with a tactile version. And so we represented our tactile design system, otherwise our tactile wireframing kit, through a legend. And that was used to communicate our patterns that we've established amongst ourselves. So within the patterns, we chose textures, the successful textures, and mapped those together for similar components. So for example, for drop-downs and text inputs, they're very similar in types of components. We use the same texture of a rough tape, and that was more of an understanding from Randy on his end to identify those patterns. On the contrast, we use felt, a completely different texture from something that's rough, for something like navigation and the header. And so we put our pattern system to the test, and we applied it again to our complex tables that Jenny mentioned at the beginning of our presentation. So our tables, we have multiple actions, add, edit, delete. We also have cascading actions, so you can have multiple adds within the same interaction or call of API. And amongst that, we also have add that applies to within the table and also within the modal. So we had all of these variations that we wanted to keep consistent with our textures. And then we tested this with Randy. Again, he's Martin, the dev manager or developer. And we laid out these screens in front of him and got his feedback and saw how he was able to identify and fill the layout of the page. But the takeaways from this round, it made it easy for us to create the wireframes because of the shared language. And it was also easy for Randy to consume because he already knew, okay, belt, navigation, texture tape, inputs. And it helped keep consistency across our designs. So if we ever worked separately, we could have this shared language. The next steps for us was to be able to make this reusable and to test it out with our development team. So phase 3. Here in our previous iterations, you can see there's glue. To represent a pattern, we also taped and glued the materials onto the page, making that a one-time use. It probably took us, I'd say, a few minutes to put this page together, but after waiting for the glue gun, putting together 5 screens for a flow, that adds up, maybe like 10, 15 minutes. But we wanted to find a way to make this quickly to put together, and also so we weren't going through a whole packet of glue for one design. So we looked at exploring the first problem of how do we attach the components to make it reusable? How do we replace that glue? We looked at Velcro. The issue with Velcro is that it added a new texture onto the surface, and we didn't want to conflict that with felt and the ready textures that existed. And so that led us to whiteboards and magnets. Whiteboards, we have it available all over through the studio. And we also discovered that our whiteboards were magnetic. So we tested out the various magnets, and they range in strength. So we found that the super strong taken off the whiteboard and it ripped off our materials. And on the contrast, we found that weak magnets, if we felt our hand across the surface, it'd shuffle all of our components and mess up the layout of the page. So we found that medium zone where we could still feel it and also take it off, put it back on. And we also used a thin type of cardboard to connect the components and magnets together. So here's what our tactile wireframe kit looks like today. It's still a work in progress, and we're continuing to add new components as we iterate through it. But on the back of each of the piece has magnet, so you can stick it onto a board, and it has a different type of texture depending on what we established with our design system. Here we have our legend, and on our legend also has Braille on top of it, so Randy can himself identify the components. And we also have normal plain text so we can remember what it says. So we put it to the test. And this goes back to our complex data tables. Here, we looked at using a side panel to replace the data table. Due to the density of our tables, side panels was a little bit more scalable for us to add all the inputs, and a little bit more accessible, which we found from testing with Randy. So how did we test this out? Well, within the room, we had Michelle, who's one of the designers on our team. She was sharing her new side panel designs with our development team that consisted of 3 devs. One was Randy, visually impaired. The other 2 were sightseeing devs. So we didn't want to have separate discussions. We wanted to have one discussion where everyone felt included. During the process, we had Michelle put together the designs for Randy so he could feel the layout as she was explaining it. But she also projected her designs digitally on the screen for the sightseeing dev. So it was all everyone in the same room, seat at the table, equal discussion. And Randy gave this feedback saying he was finally able to give useful feedback. And that's what we wanted from day one. We wanted Randy, someone that we valued his opinion as a dev manager, also as a stakeholder, his opinions as accessibility, and we wanted him to provide feedback into our process earlier in the design process rather than waiting for it to be implemented. We also tested out the kit on other components and interactions. But some of the feedback from this session, he is able to provide accessibility feedback. So things like we need to have wayfinding so you can know how to get back to the table or how to get back to the page and so on. He also provided feedback of incorporating information into the side panel since that overlays on the content onto the page. And he was just able to provide general feedback about the design and interactions itself. Other sessions we looked at, it wasn't as grand in size, but still very valuable. A simple call to action on the page. So that button in the right in the order summary is to order something. In our designs today, it's disabled if there are fields left blank. So we're working through design patterns to kind of help how someone that may be visually impaired can find that button if it's disabled. We again tested with Randy, and this introduced new patterns of disabled states that we didn't think of before and how that could surface for Randy, who's filling it out to recognize disabled versus active states. Some of the feedback that we got again was around accessibility. We learned that screen readers aren't able to identify the button if it's disabled, making it hard for someone like Randy to be able to understand the page. But the general takeaways from scaling the kit and testing out with the developers, it allowed Randy to feel empowered. He was able to contribute, feel like he had an actual stake and feedback into our design process. Again, design thinking within IBM is collaboration, and we want to collaborate with the developers, and we don't want to eliminate anyone who can see or not see. We all just want to work together. Being able to scale it, it allowed us to quickly reuse it, save time on our end. And we also discovered that we wanted a portable whiteboard. One of the rooms we found didn't actually have magnetic whiteboards, so we learned to bring a whiteboard with us for our iterations and design sessions. But so where do we go from here? Here's a loop again that Jenny showed at the beginning of make, reflect, and observe. And we're kind of going through the loop still. Right now we're in the reflect and observe. And we're trying to see ways that we can continue working on the process, testing it out, getting more components added to the kit, and just figuring out how do we want to scale this next within IBM. So like I mentioned, as we work through new designs, we'll probably add to the kit things that we didn't think of before, like active states, disabled states. I'm sure there's more to come that we haven't yet run into. We want to start testing the kit with other teams. So does this kit work within our products? Can it work with another portfolio suite of products? That's what we want to find out. We want to co-create with other teams. So can other teams add on to the kit, and can they use it for themselves? And we also want to get additional feedback from others, not just Randy, but see if the textures work for other people. Maybe for some reason the felt doesn't apply to them. That's where we want to go next. We've only shared this within IBM Design. This is really our first time externally sharing it with others, so we're very interested in hearing what everyone else thinks of our kit and get additional questions. Yeah, thank you.